All right. Welcome, everyone. And for all of you who are joining us from around the world, I'm Angela Fobbs, and this is our continuing of our Saving Our Democracy series. There are 84 days until the election. So please, if you haven't requested an absentee ballot, please go ahead and go to votefromabroad.org and request an absentee ballot. And make sure everyone in all your friends back at home and your friends and family that are living abroad with you, please also vote. And immediately after this event, we will have a live help session with one-on-one on Zoom. And I'm going to put the link in the chat in just a second. I'm going to put the link in the chat while Martha is talking. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to our international chair, Martha McDevitt Pew, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Angela. And a big thank you to everyone who's joining us here today. I'm Martha McDevitt Pew. I'm the International Chair of Democrats Abroad. I'm a lifelong California voter living in the Netherlands, and I'll be the head and the chair of DA's delegation at the Democratic National Convention next week, which we're extremely excited about. So on behalf of Democrats Abroad, I just want to say how delighted we are to have Dr. Zimmer with us today to speak about this moment in history and what we as U.S. citizens abroad can do to keep our democracy, and to dive into some really important topics of what's at stake in this election. And with the election, 84 days from today, Democrats Abroad is reaching out to Americans abroad so that they know they can vote and they know the difference their vote makes. That's such an important message. I think people here know that they can vote, but there's so many other millions of Americans out there that may not realize that. And we're here for them to bring that message, but also to take them all the way through the process of requesting their ballot and making sure that they have all the information they need and can address any issues that they have in the process of getting their ballot returned. And we know that there are going to be many close races this year up and down the ballot. We know that just like in 2020 and 2016, we know how close elections are, including the presidential election. Close elections in 50+1 states. And so it's so important. Democrats Abroad made the difference in 2020. We really showed that by bringing in more votes into Arizona and into Georgia, 18,000 votes, when President Biden's margin of victory was 12,000, we really made the case for the fact that Americans abroad can be decisive in winning elections all the way up, but also down the ballot. That's so important for us to remember. This election will likely be equally close, and Americans abroad can make the difference. And everyone knows in American abroad, there's at least 6.5 million of us, millions of us around the world, and votefromabroad.org makes it easy to request a ballot and get expert help. So just a few words before I hand off to our speaker. Thomas Zimmer is an historian and the DAAD professor at Georgetown University. His work focuses on the recent history of U.S. democracy and its discontents, specifically on anti-democratic tendencies and impulses of the American right since the 1930s. He's currently writing a new book entitled Trumpism: An American History, in which he tries to situate Trumpism as a political, social, and cultural phenomena in the longer-term context of U.S. history. He also writes the Democracy Americana newsletter on Substack and hosts the Is This Democracy podcast. Before coming to Georgetown in 2021, he was an assistant professor at Freiburg University in Germany. So with that, I'm delighted to hand off to Dr. Zimmer.
Welcome, Thomas. So glad that you could join us today from Georgetown.
Well, thank you. Sorry, can I just say, this is really cool. I was seeing all the people trickle in from all the places around the world. I don't think I've ever addressed an audience so global. So that's really cool. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, yeah, hope we do have a definitely global audience, and I'm pretty sure they have a lot of questions, but we'll get started with what you want to tell us right after we watch a quick clip.
In spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Okay, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this clip, but Thomas, What's going on? Why is he so angry and confident all at the same time?
Yeah, I mean the guy you heard speak there is Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation. He took over as president of Heritage in late 2021, and I think he'll probably be a prominent part of our discussion today because not only did he take the Heritage Foundation, which is sort of the nerve center of American conservatism, really the power center of American conservatism, the most powerful, most influential right-wing think tank since the 70s, he took it into a decidedly more openly pro-Trumpian direction, to the point where Heritage now is officially, their mission statement is now officially institutionalizing Trumpism. And they don't mean it as in taming it or moderating it. They mean it as in making it more effective, sort of preparing a more ruthless, more effective right-wing regime. He's also so important because Heritage is spearheading this massive planning operation that is called Project 2025, which is sort of the main topic we want to talk about today. So he and Heritage are also behind this. And I think what you heard him say there is, he said that this is a clip from early July. It's really in many ways captures where the American right is. And I don't talk about sort of the fringes or the hardcore MAGA extremists. I'm talking really about sort of where the power center of the American right is. Because, so two things. I mean, this is a direct threat, right? He says this will remain bloodless if the left accepts it, right? Which also means, look, if the quote unquote left, by which he means, well, anyone who's not on board with the right-wing project. So this is not like the left in a narrow sort of plausible term. Well, he means if we all accept the sort of right-wing domination, then it remains bloodless, and if not, there will be blood, right? That's a direct threat. And he also explicitly calls it an American revolution. He explicitly says we are in the midst of the second American revolution, and they are the revolutionaries. They are presenting themselves as revolutionaries, which is odd, right? If you think about it, this is not the traditional idiom of American conservatism. Conservatism, in sort of a broader sort of colloquial understanding of the term, should not be revolutionary, right? But they have completely given up on this idea that conservatism is enough. As a matter of fact, conservatism is no longer enough, has become sort of the rallying cry on the right. They openly talk about what we need to do is this, they call it a counter-revolution against sort of the supposed left-wing takeover of all American institutions. That is how they are presenting their project. That is how they are conceiving of their own role. And I think that really gives you quite the impression of where the American right is today.
Yes, that is, it does, it's a chilling place where they are. Can you tell us what is Project 2025 about? What is it?
Right. So Project 2025 is the name of a massive planning operation, again, spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation. It was launched over 2 years ago in the spring of 2022. It has brought together much of the right-wing machinery of think tanks and lobbying groups and political institutions with the goal of making the next Republican presidency again, more effective, more ruthless right-wing regime. It's, I think the best way to think about this is the American right's declaration of war on the idea of a multiracial, pluralistic, diverse society. This is a plan that amounts to a comprehensive authoritarian takeover of American government. They want to transform government into a machine that serves only two purposes. First, exacting revenge on what they call the quote-unquote woke, leftist, globalist enemy. And secondly, imposing a minoritarian, reactionary vision of white Christian patriarchal order on society. This Project 2025 is not the only planning operation that's been going on the right. Like, different factions on the right are engaged in these kinds of planning operations. It does stand out, however, because it unites so much of the conservative movement. As of right now, well over 100 conservative institutions, right-wing institutions, have signed off on Project 2025. Again, by the way, this is all online. You can just Google it. This is like publicly available information, right? If you just Google Project 2025, you'll get right to it. And then you'll see that as members of their advisory board, what they call their advisory board, again, they list all these institutions. It's a who is who of right-wing actors: Alliance Defending Freedom, America First Legal Foundation, Center for Renewing America, Claremont Institute, Liberty Universities, Moms for Liberty. They're all on there, right? And that's what sort of makes this stand out among all these planning operations, that it really has the support of much of the American right. And again, it broadly speaking envisions a vast expansion of presidential power over the executive branch. It seeks to dismantle parts of government, the administrative state, federal agencies, while simultaneously mobilizing and weaponizing other parts of government. So again, they have a massive policy plan out. It's over 900 pages long. That's also online. You can just click on it, right? They have the PDF online, over 900 pages, where they go agency by agency, department by department, federal commission by federal commission, and tell you exactly, here's what we're going to do next time we're in power. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to either dismantle these agencies and departments or sort of mobilize them, weaponize them for our purposes. They have a massive headhunting operation going on because they want to replace tens of thousands of civil servants with their own sort of hardcore, they call them, this is the record, conservative warriors. And in order to find them, they have launched this. This is also part of Project 2025, is this what they call a presidential personnel database, where they are looking for the people that they want to bring in. This part of this is a massive training effort where they are training the people that they want to bring into government. And then the final part, which isn't out yet, is they call it a 180-day playbook. Basically, what they want to do in the first 180 days of the new administration, with sort of emergency, sort of presidential executive orders and all that kind of stuff. That is the only part of Project 2025 that's not yet publicly available. Either it's not ready yet, or they don't want to put it out yet. But the other parts are publicly available. Again, the policy plan, over 920 pages. The headhunting operation and the training operation, that's all ongoing. It's been ongoing for quite some time. So that's, broadly speaking, is what we talk about when we say Project 2025.
So Project 2025 sounds like it's bigger than Trump. So how much of a role does white supremacy play in the drafting of this document? And how much about Christian nationalism is there involved in that? And of course, the tech bro billionaire belief in their own superiority. How much does all of that play a role in 2025, the project?
Well, look, so again, it is important to sort of reflect a little bit on what the relationship is between Project 2025 and Trump, to Trump campaign, the people directly around Trump, because they're not all the same, right? These are different factions on the right, and they're not just all the same. Trump himself is certainly not directly involved in Project 2025. These ideas that you've mentioned, white supremacy, Christian nationalism, so in a very broad sense, right, this is explicitly an agenda, a plan to restore and entrench what they call the quote unquote natural order. They talk about that a lot, natural order, by which they mean an America defined by hierarchies of race, gender, religion, and wealth, right? So they see America, the only America that they are willing to accept, and accept as America, as a nation defined by white Christian patriarchal domination. And to them, that is, again, they are justifying this by saying that is the natural order. Sometimes they call it the divinely ordained order, depending on who you talk to, but it's basically the same kind of concept. And they basically, what they say is, look, the natural order is under assault. It's under assault from these quote unquote woke leftist, globalist forces, the radicalized left. They have taken over the institutions of American life. They are in charge of the Democratic Party. And it is now time to, again, in the way they are presenting themselves, is that means that America, the natural order, is under siege from these fundamentally illegitimate, fundamentally un-American forces, which is why they have given themselves permission to do whatever it takes, regardless of how extreme, regardless of how radical, to fight back and entrench this quote unquote natural order. So yeah, I mean, this is ultimately, again, I strongly suggest not getting too worked up about what specific label to put on this, but what it ultimately is to say America is supposed to be a place where white Christians and white Christian men specifically have a right to be at the top and have a right to define what is and what is not America and who does and does not count as American. That is the natural order. And we're going to do everything it takes in order to entrench or re-entrench that order. And that this is really important, against the majority will of the people, because they are 100% clear that they do not have majority support in the American population. They know this they understand this better than anyone, which is precisely why Project 2025 is all about finding ways of mobilizing, using this vast, powerful machine that is the American government, right? In order to impose this vision against majority will onto the entire country.
So if they know they're not popular, they don't have the majority, why do they seem so confident that they make videos like Angela just showed, or that they make statements and they publish the darn thing online? Where does that confidence come from? That hubris, really?
I mean, it's both, right? It's there is an element of confidence, but I think it's better to start from this, what we see here, this type of radicalization on the American right, where again, they are openly saying, we're done with conservatism, we are going for a counter-revolution that may or may not entail a lot of violence. That does not come from a place of strength. It comes from a place of weakness. They feel their backs against the wall. They have the sense, like, and this is something that they all constantly talk about. We are under siege. Real, quote unquote, real America. They talk about real America a lot. They are the real Americans, right? Real America is under siege. We have our backs against the wall. We have been on the defensive for too long. So again, that is why they are radicalizing so much, right? Because they feel like, and you see this if you read the Kevin Roberts, again, the guy we heard in the beginning, the president of the Heritage Foundation, he wrote the foreword for this 920-page policy report. It's called Mandate for Leadership, the policy report. And again, in it, he wrote the foreword. It's only 15, 16 pages long. And I mean this sincerely. Like, I understand not everyone can like read 920 pages of this stuff. It's just not a nice read, right? But if I could, I would make everyone read just the foreword that Kevin Roberts wrote. It is so, it oozes this sense of being under siege, of being on the defensive, and he constantly talks about, we have so little time left. We have only one chance left to fight back, right? This is it. The coming election. We're either going to win or America is going to be destroyed, and it's going to be no more. So no holding back, right? There's literally no line that they're not willing to cross, because this is constantly in the way he talks about this. This is it. This is our last chance to save America, save the Republic, that sort of thing. Let me see if I can give you a direct quote, because it's always better to. If you don't trust me, maybe people can trust Kevin Roberts, right? So here he says, so this is from this forward, right? He says, time is running short. If we fail, the fight for the very idea of America may be lost. This is the last opportunity to save our republic. This is all he talks about, right? So this is not sounding confident, right? This is not sounding like, oh, we're so strong, we're so strong. But then what happened here is they put this stuff out. This policy report was published over a year ago, and there's always been some reporting on this, but a little bit trickling here and there. People like me, whose job it is to follow this stuff, have probably talked about this for longer. But it wasn't until this spring that Project 2025 and what these people are up to started to get a lot of attention. A lot of mainstream attention, right? And I think over the past few months, and really sort of crystallizing, peaking in June, it really exploded, where it was everywhere, right? I mean, if you're watching MSNBC or whatever, it was everywhere. Project 2025. And I think that gave these people, they got a little drunk on their own supposed success. Look how frightened the libs are. Look how frightened the left is. Ha, here we go, right? And I think in a weird way, this has come to bite them because, this is also precisely the moment where Trump himself reacted sort of aggressively against this, because Project 2025 has been toxic, right? I mean, Democrats, liberals, the quote unquote left, the mainstream media has sort of succeeded at making this toxic. Project 2025 is now sort of a stand-in for look how radical these people are, look how unpopular that stuff is, right? And I think at some point, Trump looked at this, and by the way, like literally the day after the little interview that we saw in the beginning with Kevin Roberts, the day after, Trump came out with a statement and said, I know nothing about Project 2025. I am in no way affiliated with Project. These guys, they have no influence on like my agenda, whatever, which is complete nonsense, by the way, complete nonsense. But it shows you how, again, I think they got a little drunk on their own. Like I think they sort of misread the constant attention as like a sign of how they are succeeding, when in fact it was a sign of how the American public was reacting quite strongly, like in a negative way to what they were reading there. And I think people like Kevin Roberts specifically, he felt himself a little bit there, and he made a strategic mistake with this kind of stuff. Again, to the point where there's now a lot of infighting on the right, not over substance. Substantively, they all agree on this kind of stuff, but the Trump campaign specifically is not happy about the way these Project 2025 folks went out there, and again, were sort of got a little too. They got in over their own. I think they got a little drunk on the quote unquote success they got there. But it's not confidence per se that's happening here.
Well, I hope it's not confidence. I think that we outnumber them, but sometimes it's hard to tell. I don't know if you saw the recent release from ProPublica about the training videos for our government. Can you talk a little bit about how this Project 2025 plan will affect civil service and the military? I know we have a lot of people out there that are living overseas that work for the military or for the government in general.
Right. So I think let's talk about civil service, because there's a massive part of all of this stuff, because underlying all the policy proposals, again, that I have outlined in this 900-page policy document, underlying all of this is the fever dream of sort of a great purge of government officials who are to be replaced with kind of a vast army of loyalists, right? This is where Schedule F comes in. That's probably something that a lot of people have heard about. Shortly before the 2020 election, Donald Trump, this is late October 2020, Donald Trump signed an executive order. It was called Schedule F. That was rescinded by Biden immediately upon taking office before it could really do any damage. But it was intended to fight the sinister, quote unquote, deep state. That's what we're really talking about here, right? When the right talks about the deep state, this is what they mean, these bureaucrats, these experts across American government. And the right wingers are now determined to execute Schedule F as soon as they get another chance. That is an absolutely crucial part of this planning operation. What this would do is it would convert tens of thousands of career civil service positions into political appointments, starting with anyone in a this is their phrasing, policy adjacent position or policy advisory role. That's how they phrase it. The goal is to strip these people, again, we're talking about tens of thousands of civil servants, of their job protections, of their civil service job protections, in order to make them fireable and then fire them, right? That's the whole point. No more independent experts or competent bureaucrats or that sort of thing, because that is, so the underlying diagnosis is that slowed us down in the first Trump administration. Those were the people who sabotaged what we wanted to do, right? That's, again, the quote unquote deep state that is hostile to the Trumpian, the right wing project. So they want to get rid of all these people and replace them with their own loyalists. Now, again, that only makes sense if, like, opening up 50,000 positions across American government only makes sense if you have the personnel to fill those positions. And that is why, in order to find what they call conservative warriors, that's a direct quote, Project 2025 is currently building this presidential personnel database. It's an unprecedented headhunting operation to ensure ideological conformity. They are vetting thousands of people with the help of mostly sort of an online questionnaire thing that is designed to identify true ideological believers. They're looking for purity. They're looking for radicalism. Again, this is a direct quote from someone affiliated with this project. They say, we're not looking for George W. Bush Republicans. We're looking for Tucker Republicans. They mean Tucker Carlson, right? So again, so this is what they're doing, where people are being subjected to these questions like, you're supposed to answer, the police in America are systemically racist. Agree or disagree, right? That sort of thing. And I'm assuming, right, if you agree with that statement, there is a problem of systemic racism, then they do not want you, right? That sort of thing. So they go through a series of questions, and that is the people that they are, again, they're collecting names, they're collecting these people, they're hoping to get to a number close-ish to 50,000. And then they are training them, right? That's where these videos come in, this presidential training academy or whatever they call it, where they try to make sure that all these people are on the same page. They know what to do from day one coming in. Again, in contrast to 2017, when they came in with no personnel, no plans, and absolutely no idea how American government worked. That's sort of the underlying diagnosis for all of this is we were not, they are saying this, we were not ready in 2017. Next time we will be.
Oh, that's super scary. That what you're saying is that if we win in 2024, we will be sort of facing the same problem in 2028. That we have to just keep pushing back against them, or do you think that they will scatter like roaches and just go into the dark crevices of everything?
I mean, so this is a big question, right? So what happens if they lose? Oh, look, if they win this election again, right? Completely different ball game compared to 2017. Like anyone still clinging to the illusion that Trump 2 would be anywhere comparable to Trump 1, that's really dangerous. It would not be. It would be a completely different game this time. But what happens if they lose, if Trump is defeated? Well, I do think the biggest mistake would be to assume a return to sort of a pre-Trump, quote unquote, normalcy. Trump is not merely an accident. He's not an aberration. He's not like he didn't fall from the sky somehow. He has exacerbated, but not caused the anti-democratic radicalization of the Republican Party and the conservative mainstream, right? And I think Project 2025 is so important and so enlightening because it captures this broad consensus on the right that sort of radical extreme measures against what they see as a fundamentally illegitimate, un-American, woke left are not only justified, but urgently necessary, right? So another presidential election laws will not return them to the democratic fold. If anything, I mean, small d democratic fold, right? If anything, it is bound to escalate that feeling of being under siege that is animating so much of what has been happening on the right. Again, that's what I was trying to get at, right? When I said this is not coming from a place of strength, it's coming from this place of supposed weakness, of this feeling of being under siege. And look, if you look at the past, the entire 21st century, basically, I mean, that's like after 2012, right? There was this moment when Mitt Romney lost the election to Barack Obama. There was the moment when the RNC put out this autopsy report that called for moderation and said, look, we need to like reach out to these traditionally marginalized people and people of color. And we can't just sit here and go all white Christian domination, right? We need to like win these people over. And instead they went with Trump, right? So they went the complete opposite direction. So you see that, I think that is, to me, that is the most consequential development in recent American history, in recent American politics, is that the Republican Party, the American right more broadly, has entirely given up on the idea of winning over and representing the actual majority of the American people. They have, again, that was still a thing, right? To some extent, people may remember like under George W. Bush, there was all this talk about compassionate conservatism, right? Whatever you wanted to sort of, whatever you think about that, but it was at least an acknowledgement that they needed to have some sort of outreach to like real existing America, which is becoming, mostly because of demographic change, becoming less white and less Christian. It's becoming more pluralistic. And so they felt like, maybe we need to reach out to these people. So there was still, this idea was still around. But again, if you look at the actual trajectory of the Republican Party, they have completely given up on this. They are now 100% open about the fact that, no, we are not the majority. We do not represent the majority, but we are, as they call it, a quote unquote virtuous minority, a minority of real Americans who represent sort of the true essence of the nation, that sort of thing, right? And that is how they justify their claim to power, not by democratic legitimacy, not by majority support. It's a minority. It's an increasingly authoritarian minority project, and I think again that is not going away. The fundamental reality in American politics right now is that the fault lines in the struggle over whether or not this country should be a pluralistic, multiracial, egalitarian democracy, yes or no. The fault lines in that struggle, that's an age-old struggle. That's always been contested, right? But what is so distinct about our moment is that the fault lines in that struggle are mapping perfectly onto the struggle between the two major parties, right? It's the same conflict. As of right now, there is only one small d Democratic Party in the United States, and that is the capital D Democratic Party. But look, that's terrible for a democracy, right? Because that means that, in effect, in every election, democracy itself is on the ballot, because it's not just about tax policy or whatever. But again, if the fault lines in the struggle over democracy, yes or no, align with the fault lines between the two major parties, that means that in every election, democracy itself is on the ballot. That's not going to go away. That's not going to go away if Trump is defeated. That's going to be with us for the foreseeable future.
So I'm glad we're talking to a historian, because maybe you can tell us, has this happened before in history? You know, we've all seen this meme circulating in social media, vote like it's 1933 in Germany. Would you care to comment on this parallel? Is it accurate? Has this happened before?
Right. So, look, I do believe there are parallels, to democracy's demise or near demise in the 1930s. By the way, that wasn't just Germany, right? Democracy basically vanished from almost the entirety of Europe within sort of a 10-year period from the mid-1920s through the mid-1930s in Europe. The question is, so there's a parallel, right? The question is, what are we to make of those parallels? So I will talk a little, I'll say something for this comparison, and then I'll push back a little bit against this comparison, right? So one thing that is striking is that the far right, on the far right, these people are making that comparison themselves. They are all in on that comparison. They are saying, oh, this is just like late Weimar Germany. And they mean it in terms of like, oh, this is a rotten system ripe for the taking. And they're also basically salivating at the prospect of taking down this sort of late Weimar Germany like America, right? So they are talking about this all the time. What is striking is that in all of these societies in the interwar period where democracies fell, it's not that far-right parties and movements got majority support in the population. That happened basically nowhere. They tapped out at like 30 to 35% of the support in the population, just like the Nazi Party bit. They never, in anything resembling a free election, they never got beyond like 36, 37% of the vote, right? That's the best they could ever do. So in order to get power, they relied on the more established right, the establishment, conservative parties and factions, to make common cause with them, right? Otherwise, the far right doesn't get to power unless more established conservatives decide to make a common cause with them. And that's what happened in the 1930s or late 20s, 1930s, because the more established conservatives basically decided that the quote-unquote radical left was a more urgent, more dangerous threat, right? The communists, the socialists. And so they made a conscious decision to make common cause with the far right. And in Germany, that meant elevating Hitler and the Nazis to the chancellorship. But again, this happened almost everywhere across the continent. And I think in that sense, unfortunately, you see some very concerning parallels today when you hear these more, not just the fringe figures, like the open sort of white supremacist, neo-Nazi types, but like, someone like Bill Barr, right? Former Attorney General Bill Barr, like when he's asked, what's the biggest threat to America? It's the radical left. He still says that, right? So that guy's so interesting to me because he's very openly saying, oh, yeah, no, Trump is crazy. And he tried a coup on January 6th. And again, he's like absolutely not fit to be president. But then he will also say, oh, yeah, I mean, I will support him in 2024, right? He will say, Bill Barr still says, if Trump's the nominee, I'll vote for him, right? And then journalists will ask him, well, wait, you just said the man is crazy and tried a coup. And then Bill Barr says, oh, yeah, but the biggest threat to America is the far left. So that is that type of making common cause, right, with the far right that is really dangerous. The reason why I want to push back a little bit against reaching for that comparison to the European interwar period, to like Weimar Germany, the rise of the Nazis, is that there is a bit of a danger to some extent to sort of exceptionalize and externalize Trump and Trumpism and the radicalization of the Republican Party from American history, as in, oh, this is so extreme and so un-American, we have to reach for something from Europe's past to make sense of it, right? When I think in many ways, the most instructive parallel or reference point in history is actually here in America's own history, which is the moments in which any kind of racial or social progress, or even just perceived racial and social progress, was answered by and followed by a radical right-wing counter-mobilization against that, right? So I'm thinking about what happened after Reconstruction, for instance. Reconstruction is that short period after the Civil War, the first attempt to actually try at that point biracial democracy. It was not yet multiracial, but it was a biracial democracy in America after the Civil War. And it was followed by, or it was drowned in a mixture of ostensibly race-neutral laws that were not race-neutral at all, and violence, just an unbelievable level of violence against Black people and anyone who would support them. Or I'm thinking about the 1950s and 60s, of course, when, again, the next attempt to actually turn the country into anything that looked like a multiracial democracy was answered by, again, this sort of counter-mobilization. It's not a coincidence that what we call modern conservatism, the modern conservative movement, formed in direct reaction to this attempt in the 1950s and 60s to make this country into a multiracial democracy. And they explicitly said, no, we don't want it, right? And those who don't want that, those who are not on board with the vision of multiracial pluralistic democracy, they have throughout American history at some points been willing to exist and function within the system as long as their understanding of what America should be, again, a society in which white Christians and white Christian men specifically are at the top, as long as that wasn't too much under threat, as long as all this democracy stuff wasn't undermining that order too much, they were willing to kind of go along with that a little bit. But we have seen many times where they have clearly said, oh, look, if this democracy stuff actually goes to undermine what I think America is, the quote unquote real America, then they have been willing to use violence or violent threat to prevent this multiracial pluralistic democracy from ever becoming a reality. And I think, to me, those are the more direct and in many ways more instructive parallels from history to look at, rather than reach for the European interwar period.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's been 1919 was the Red Summer, where white people struck out at African Americans for various reasons. I mean, there was I can't remember what it was in Wilmington, where they overthrew the interracial government because white men couldn't deal with it. I have kind of two questions. So what happens to the rest of us that are not men and are not white or not Christian?
Right. Well, look, in this understanding of the world and what America is supposed to be, everyone who's not sort of a conservative white Christian has to accept their lesser place and shut up and accept, right? That not you specifically, but you as in everyone who deviates from this understanding of what quote unquote real America is supposed to be, right? Everyone who dares to deviate from that has to just accept that that's no longer going to happen, right? That's very sort of explicit on the right now. The citizenship of everyone who deviates from their vision of what real America is conditional. And it's conditional on accepting their vision of America. And if you don't accept it, then you have forfeited the right to be considered a member of the body politic, right? There is a text that I often refer to. It was written by this guy, Glenn Elmers, who's one of the sort of right-wing intellectuals who are all in on Trump. He comes from that Claremont Institute environment, right? This is sort of the most openly pro-Trumpian part of the right-wing intellectual sphere. And this guy wrote, this is in April 2021, so it's after the 2020 election. He wrote this piece that's really, really instructive. Again, it's online, you can just Google it. It's called "Conservatism is No Longer Enough." And he explicitly says, by the way, this is important, right? So these are not people who are in on Trump's big lie about, oh, the election was stolen and I actually won. These people exist too, of course. But in the right-wing sort of intellectual sphere, these right-wing thinkers, they don't believe that. They think, no, the problem actually is that we actually did lose that election, which means we, proponents of real America, are already in the minority. We are already so much under siege that we can't win elections anymore. That's what is driving them, right? And so this guy, Glenn Elmo, says, look, everyone who voted for Joe Biden in that election, because Joe Biden supposedly is the leader of this fundamentally illegitimate coalition of people, this fundamentally illegitimate political project of like multiracial pluralism, right? Everyone who voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 election has forfeited the right to be considered an American. They should not be considered part of the American body politic anymore. That's explicitly what he's saying, right? And you see this this is not just some fringe nut job kind of people. This is pervasive on the right. They truly believe, look, this is America, and if you're not in with this sort of understanding, you're out, right? And what that means, for instance, is, well, get rid of birthright citizenship, right? They want to explicitly get rid of birthright citizenship. They don't think that's right. Or think of like J.D. Vance's speech at the Republican convention just a few weeks ago, where he explicitly said, America is not defined by an idea, that is traditionally, right, this thing that America is defined by this idea of all people are created equal, which, look, in practice, it has never been that, right? We all know this, right? But it's important to say, no, but as a sort of an aspirational goal, that is still we are clinging to and what we're trying to get to. But Vance is like, no, that's not actually true. And he gives this sort of blood and soil nationalism answer to what America is. America is a place for a specific group of people who look like me. That's explicitly what he said. That is blood and soil ethno-nationalism. And it's, again, it is fundamentally incompatible with this vision of a multiracial, pluralistic democracy, egalitarian democracy. And that is the conflict, right? That is the conflict. And these people, and I mean this sincerely, I think these people on the right are in many ways much clearer about what the conflict is all about, and they're more explicit about it. So really, it's really worth listening to them, right? Not to agree with them, but to listen to how they frame the conflict, because they are so explicit. And I think they understand 100%. They are 100% clear. If this were America, I mean, if this were a functioning democratic system, they would not be in, they would now have no shot at power, right? But unfortunately, it's not a functioning democratic system. It is a system that that awards disproportionate power to this sort of white conservative group of people because of the many sort of anti-majoritarian elements in the American Constitution, and because the Republicans, at least in Republican-led states, are also sort of undermining all these democratic elements in the political system. And that means Republicans don't need 50% of the vote, right? They don't need 50% of support from the people. They don't need majorities. And they understand this so clearly. They reached a point, the American right reached a point where they had a choice to make. They could either cling to their vision of white Christian patriarchal domination, right? But then accept, again, in a democratic system, they would have to accept that means relinquishing power, because in a increasingly multiracial, pluralistic America, you do not get majority support for that vision, right? So that's what they could have done. They could have said, well, we're sticking with our vision and we relinquish power. Or they could have broadened their vision and kind of become a more inclusive party, a more inclusive political project. They chose a third way. They said, oh, wait, you said in a democratic system, we can't hold on to this vision and still hold on to power. Well, then democracy has to go. That's the choice they made, right? That is the choice they made. And I think they could not be, honestly, this is sort of the beauty, quote unquote, beauty of Project 2025 is these people could not be clearer about what is animating them, how anti-democratic they are. Democracy, multiracial democracy is their declared enemy. This is a declaration of war on that. And they could not be clearer about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
what are we supposed to do about it? What do you recommend that we do?
I mean, Angela asked me that question when we talked on the phone 2 days ago, and I'll say, and this is, I know this is sort of maybe a cop out or a sort of a disappointing answer, but look, I want to be honest. Like, I have no experience in organizing at all. Look, I'm sitting here. I'm a historian, right? I read and write all day. And so I am not the person to give you like concrete answers to how to organize against this and what sort of activist measures to take. And I mean this sincerely, as in I have too much respect for people who actually do that work and have that experience to just sit here and pull stuff out of my, I'm not going to say it, but I'm not going to do that, right? What I hope I can do is maybe sort of help people get the diagnosis right. So the underlying diagnosis of what's happening here and what's happening on the American right and what the political conflict is all about. And then sort of build whatever organizing response on that kind of realistic, sort of adequate diagnosis, and maybe sort of help people understand the stakes. And this is really something that I want to emphasize is I still encounter this too much when I talk to people. This idea that, oh, look, we've had this before. Trump was in power for 4 years, and either they say it wasn't that bad, which I think it was quite bad, but they mean it as in he wasn't able the first time around to completely demolish the American political system, which is true, right? To some extent, the guardrails functioned. Like the stuff, like again, the American right, these people are the people behind Project 2025. They are extremely disappointed with the first Trump administration, right? They think it was a complete failure because they were not able to implement what they really wanted to implement for America, right? The kinds of plans that they have now put to paper. And the reasons why they were not able is, well, first of all, again, they were so unprepared, right? No plan, no personnel, no idea how government worked. That's already out the window. That's completely different this time because, again, they have these plans now and they have the people. But there were also sort of context factors that made it more difficult for them. One is the courts stepped in. Two, there was still sort of a contingent of people in the Republican Party who were not on board with this kind of stuff, right? And three, there was a lot of sort of just public, popular protest against it, a mobilization of the public against it. Now, all three of these elements, these context elements, would be completely different in a second Trump administration. The courts, look, I hope I don't have to tell anyone after what the Supreme Court has been up to most recently that we cannot count, no one should count on the courts to do anything, right? This time, a second Trump administration could count on a reactionary supermajority on the court. Remember, they did not have that in the first Trump administration, right? This is new. That would be completely new. That's one thing. Second thing, whatever sort of, whatever reluctance or resistance to Trumpism was still present in the Republican Party is gone, right? It's out. These people have been ostracized and banned from the Republican Party. Like, think about like Liz Cheney or Mitt Romney. I don't want to sort of put these people on a pedestal like they're not, like these are, like Liz Cheney specifically is a proper, very, very right-wing conservative person. But they drew the line somewhere. They drew the line at, we're not going to support a violent assault on the American government on January 6th. And that got them ostracized from the party, right? They're banned. So these people are out. And then the third part is, well, the protest and sort of the public mobilizing and against this kind of political project. Well, look, the thing is, political violence is on the rise in America. We now see a level of political violence and a political threat that goes far beyond anything we've seen 8, 7, 6 years ago. Anyone, and I don't just mean people on the left, anyone within the Republican Party, anyone on the right who even like election officials or people on the state level who say anything against Trump, they know that they will be subjected to just a flood of violent threat from MAGA, from the base, from these right-wing extremists. That was just not the case in the beginning of Trump 1. And also, again, the American right, they understand that what they are doing here is extremely unpopular, and they understand that this might cause protests, mass protests. And I think they are preparing for that by, for instance, on the state level, already outlawing protest, right? We've seen the proliferation of these riot laws. Oklahoma, for instance, has a riot law on the books now that they can declare any gathering of 7 or more people a riot, make it illegal, therefore, give the police the authority to disband it. And also explicitly in the law, in that riot law, it says, and also if it is declared a riot, then people have a right to help themselves against those rioters, for instance, by attacking them on the street. Like you can now run over protesters if they're declared rioters in Oklahoma in your pickup truck, and you will not be held responsible in any way legally. Right. So that stuff is coming, the criminalization of protest. And also, this is the last thing I'll say on this. Trump's biggest regret, he says this pretty openly, and all these people in Project 2025, they share this. Their biggest regret is not invoking the Insurrection Act in the summer of 2020 to put down the mass protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, right? Trump wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act. That would have given him authority to call in federal troops to oppress those protests, right? Now, a president can do that, by the way. There's no way to stop that. That's just a prerogative of the president. But there were people around him, lawyers in and around the White House, who talked him out of it, who said, no, we can't do this. That's not right. Don't do it. He now says that's my biggest mistake. I should not have listened to these people. And one of the things that both Project 2025 and also the Trump campaign more specifically envision for next time they're in power is they want nothing to do with these kinds of lawyers. No one who has any qualms about legality and precedent and all that kind of stuff is out. They want people whose sole mission is to just do whatever the regime wants to do. And I'm 100% certain that, again, they would not allow mass protest. They would invoke the Insurrection Act, and then they would send troops. And then what does that look like, right? So again, I think Americans might want to protest. They might want to stand up. The numerical majority of Americans might want to stand up to this kind of stuff. But it would be far more dangerous and far more difficult than the last time around. And I think really, whenever you hear someone say, it can't be that bad, we've been through it before, Trump was in power before, it's nonsense. It's based on ignorance, not following what's going on, just not being up to speed of how much they have radicalized. It would be a completely different ballgame.
Yes, it definitely would. And we're going to continue on with some more questions and take some questions from the audience in a bit, but I just want to put out a couple of things into the chat. One is how you can help get out the vote wherever you are, because it's really important. I mean, you've heard Thomas, you've probably seen all sorts of things on TV, but every little thing that you can do will help. Even if it's just put up a flyer or pass out a card or email your friends or message them to remind them to vote. This isn't a joke, and all the things that Thomas has said has been super, super serious. Like I thought that this plan was a terrible thing to begin with. But again, if you haven't requested your ballot, please go ahead and do it. And please use votefromabroad.org. Sometimes when you go directly to your state, it doesn't work because you're living overseas. So all your rights are guaranteed when you use the federal postcard application. I want to just kind of broach the elephant in the room, sort of. What does Project 2025 say about women and the LGBTQ?
So first of all, again, this is 100% a project of imposing on the whole goal of all of this is to impose this vision of white Christian patriarchal dominance on society, right? And so everyone who deviates from that, and obviously everyone in the LGBTQ community deviates from that in their understanding, that's a problem. And that is a problem that Project 2025 is 100% explicit about. We are no longer going to indulge and accept this kind of like pluralism stuff, right? I think this becomes really clear. I want to break it, maybe be a little more concrete and tell you what that breaks down in practice, right? So if you look at, for instance, what they want to do to the Department of Health and Human Services, right? Because again, like this 900-page policy planning document, it goes agency by agency and department by department. And you see how, for instance, public health is seen purely as a tool to uphold a traditionalist conservative Christian understanding of gender, of family, of marriage, and of motherhood. The goal is to turn DHS, again, that's the Department of Health and Human Services, right, into, they call it the Department of Life. And they mean white Christian patriarchal life, right? People, lifestyles, identities that deviate from such an understanding are not to be recognized by the government, are not to be considered healthy, or don't have a right to health care. They're 100% explicit about this kind of stuff. I mean, as a matter of fact, everything they say about the Department of Health and Human Services, it doesn't really revolve around public health or individual health at all, right? The overriding concern is, well, they call it protecting life, conscience, and bodily integrity. But again, it's all about, it's a broad assault on bodily autonomy, on self-determination, on the rights of LGBTQ people, all under the umbrella of protecting the quote, this is the direct quote, the fundamental right to life. And they say protect conscience rights and uphold bodily integrity rooted in biological realities, not ideology, right? Now, look, they talk about promoting stable and flourishing married families, and family means, again, this is a direct quote, married men and women are the ideal natural family structure because all children have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. No more of this quote unquote unnatural pluralism stuff, right? Lifestyles, identities, family structures. That's all out, right? Deviation is not to be tolerated. There's another direct quote, all from the Department of Health and Human Services chapter. Radical actors inside and outside government are promoting harmful identity politics that replaces biological sex with subjective notions of gender identity and bases a person's worth on his or her race, sex, or other identities. No more. That's out for them, right? So what that you can probably assume what that means for abortion, right? They are 100% clear. They want to institute basically what amounts to a total abortion ban through the back door, right? They're saying, this is direct quote, HHS, again, Health and Human Services, should return to being known as the Department of Life by explicitly rejecting the notion that abortion is healthcare. That's out for them, right? The way they want to do this, because they know they might not be able to get national legislation to outlaw abortion, right? They know they might not be in the position in Congress to do that. So they want to, again, use government to do that through the back door. So for instance, medical abortion and what they call mail order abortions or chemical abortions is to be outlawed, right? They want to outlaw mifepristone. The FDA wouldn't approve abortion medication. They want to outlaw the shipping of abortion medication. And then also, this is the last thing I'll maybe note on this particular part, they want to supercharge abortion surveillance via the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, right? It's because what they want to do is they want to sort of this, they want to end what they call, quote, abortion tourism, right? So the problem, according to them, is that, quote, liberal states have now become sanctuaries for abortion tourism. So what they want to do is they want to use the CDC to collect abortion data from the entire country in one place and force blue states to comply with that. So for instance, right now, California is not giving that information about abortions to the federal government, but they want to force everyone, including blue states, to do that. So this is another direct quote. HHS should use every available tool, including the cutting of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. So what they are envisioning is a unified data bank with comprehensive data on every abortion in America in the hands of this sort of patriarchal regime lusting for the control over the bodies of women. So I mean, and that's what this report is all about. So again, like there's no like reading in between the lines here. I don't have to like tell you a subtext or whatever. It's all, they are very explicit about what they want to do here.
Wow. Yeah, that is, I there was a clip that I didn't get a chance to snip out, but it was on MSNBC with on some program, and Kevin Roberts came on and he said very explicitly that abortion isn't healthcare.
Again,
And
that's also what's in the report, right? Abortion is not healthcare. Enough with this stuff. They're 100% explicit. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. Absolutely, yeah. That's, again, and I want to be clear, right? They don't need legislation for this, right? They do not need they do not need a majority in Congress for this. They just need to be in charge of the White House and then mobilize the executive and the administrative state in this kind of fashion. I don't see what would be stopping them from doing this, right? If they were to get back to the White House.
So I wonder, we're spread all over the globe, as you know, and so we read the newspaper in our own countries, and we see some similarities here. Can you help us connect the dots between Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban and the Project 2025? And are there other foreign actors involved that we don't know about?
So Viktor Orban is interesting. So Orban plays a key role in the right-wing imagination in the United States, right? So I think I said this to you, Angela, 2 days ago. Find yourself someone in life who loves and admires you half as much as the American right and the right-wing intellectuals here love and admire Viktor Orban. They love him so much. So I think this is a crucial reminder that we are looking at a conflict that isn't confined to the United States, right? This is a political conflict that should be seen in the context of a much broader transnational conflict that in many ways shapes and defines the political situation, the political fault lines in every democracy. And I think that is the conflict between, again, these two fundamentally incompatible visions of what our societies should be. On the one hand, there is this reactionary ethno-nationalism, and then on the other is this idea of a multiracial, pluralistic, gender egalitarian democracy. And the reason why reactionary and right-wing movements and parties were so enthusiastic about Trump's rise in 2016 is that they, somewhat rightfully so, I think, view the situation in the United States as a window into the near future, a future that they fear and despise. Because demographically and socially and culturally, America is much further along on the trajectory towards a more multiracial, religiously and culturally pluralistic society, right? And in that sense, it's sort of that sort of window into the future. So the question then is, and it is a question, I think, of world historical importance, is it possible to make egalitarian democracy work under such conditions of multiracial pluralism? And in the interpretation of the right-wingers everywhere, Trump's win in 2016 was seen as proof that this would not work, that the quote-unquote people, the real people, right, would not accept that the forces of ethno-nationalist reaction would ultimately defeat the devil of liberal pluralism. That was, in their interpretation, the significance of Trump. He was supposed to stem the tide of liberal multiracial pluralism. Now, when that didn't work the way they had hoped, that's when right-wingers everywhere looked for other figures who could take on that mantle. They landed on Putin and they landed on Orban, right? Who is seen by the American right as a defender of the quote-unquote natural order that we talked about earlier, which is again supposedly defined by white Christian patriarchal dominance. And by the way, they really know absolutely nothing about Hungary as it exists in real life, right? There's just this bizarre idea of Hungary as a white Christian wonderland where real men still get to be real men. That's all they know nothing. So again, all of this is to say, yes, Orban is important as a symbolic figure for the right, as a reference point, and also as an inspiration, even in concrete policy terms. However, I do want to caution against describing what we see on the right in America as sort of American Orbanism. And I've seen that term used a little bit over the past few months, like, oh, this is basically Orbanism in America. So for two reasons, I want to caution against this. So one is the radicalization of the right in the US is not the result of foreign influences or just a copycat thing of what happens elsewhere. There is a long domestic American tradition of these anti-democratic tendencies and impulses, right? These people on the American right, they do not learn how to despise America from abroad. There's a long American tradition of that, right? So we're not looking at something that is foreign to US history and the US political tradition, but to something that has always been a constitutive part of the American political tradition. And two, again, for the American right, Orban's Hungary is a white Christian patriarchal wonderland. That is the idea and the vision that they want to implement here in the United States. But if you want to implement such a vision over here in the US, in the context of a society that is significantly more multiracial, more pluralistic, and you set out to impose such a white Christian ethno-religious nationalism against the clear majority of the people, you need to take some really extreme measures. And that is exactly what we are seeing on the right and what we are seeing in these plans that we are talking about here, right? They envision a much more radical form of Orbanism, right? So in that sense, Orbanism is underselling sort of the extent of the how radical it is, what we're looking at here. So for instance, right, they are envisioning an unprecedented mass deportation of 15 million people carried out by a newly created, uniformed, armed deportation force that would be bigger than the US military today. It would roam the country and just round up everyone as they see fit. That is explicitly the plan and the promise of the Trump campaign, right? This is not, I'm not just making this up. This is explicitly the promise that Trump is giving every night. It's in the Republican platform. 15 million people. We're going to deport them and we're going to build this massive deportation force, again, larger than the US military today. That is the type of measure that, again, if you say we need to turn this into this white Christian domination wonderland, well, then that is the type of measure that you need to take, right? And they are willing to do that.
Wow. Okay.
It's a bit of a bummer, isn't it?
Well, it's not. It's not really a bummer. I mean, we can do a lot of things to fight back. And the first thing, I can't say this enough, is to vote, but it's also other things that you can do. And just remember, when these people, like Maya Angelou said, when they tell you, who they are, believe them. Stop trying to think, oh, they don't mean this, or they're not really trying to do this. I mean, they wrote it all down and they're not shy about it. They're training people up. And so we as citizens have to respond. Democracy isn't just voting. It's also doing things to protect our democracy. And I would, at this moment, I want to implore every person who is a former military, current military, or a civil servant who's taken an oath like I did to protect and defend the Constitution from enemies at home and abroad. This is why I do this work. I took an oath. I swore an oath to do it. And this is your time. So if you are in one of these categories, please, you've got to do everything you can to make sure that we win this election. So I'm not going to preach to the choir too much. I just want to answer some of the questions that we have in our chat. So this is I think this is a good question. And there's a couple like this. Do you think that now that Harris and Walz are the candidates, that this has changed anything? And do you think that they're a bit frightened by this, or do you think they're just going to blow it off and keep going?
So, I mean, everything we hear, the rumblings from inside the Trump campaign and on the American right, is they're absolutely they're terrified. They really thought they were going to win the election against Joe Biden. They were absolutely sure they were going to win the election against Joe Biden. And now, the things have changed, right? I mean, you see it. Look, I'm sort of reluctant to put too much stock into polling, or at least you have to be careful how you interpret polling, right? But there's still no question that the general direction of polling is still that still tells us something. And the general direction of all the polling we've seen over the past 2 weeks is that the Harris is looking a lot stronger than Biden was looking by the end. There's no question about this. By the way, this has nothing to do with fair or deserve, right? Did Joe Biden deserve, or is it fair to Joe Biden? That's not what I'm talking about here. That's got nothing to. I'm just talking about. It's just a matter of fact that as of right now, Kamala Harris is looking a lot stronger in the polling we have than Joe Biden looked by the end. That's just how it's looking, right? And I think so. That is one thing, right? But what is striking to me, and I just wrote about this for my newsletter this week because it's so striking to me. You've all heard about this new. I mean, Tim Walz sort of pioneered this line. These guys are weird, right? These guys are just weird, and now he's on the ticket. And I think what is so striking about this new attitude, what this messaging stands for to me is that Democrats are taking a much more aggressive stance against this right-wing assault on authoritarianism, right? Like, this is ultimately a struggle over this sort of the messaging. These guys are weird. It matters because this is ultimately a struggle over who gets to define what is quote unquote normal and acceptable in America, and who gets to say, oh, but some people don't belong because they're like weird, right? And for the longest time, this has been the claim to power for Republicans, really since the late 1960s, when Richard Nixon said, I speak for the silent majority, right? That was the whole thing about this is that traditional Republican claim is to say, we are the real Americans. We speak for real America. Real America, as in like it's very white and it's older and it's Christian, right? And it's like all this the idea of heartland America and all this kind of extremely ideological stuff, right? And that was their claim to power. Their claim to legitimacy was to say, yeah, you Democrats, you can do whatever you want, but we ultimately we speak for the default Americans, right? We speak for default America. We speak for normal America. We speak for, again, that was this whole idea of the silent majority. And for too long, I think the mainstream discourse in this country has kind of accepted that. And even many Democrats have kind of went along with that and had kind of a sort of a reluctance to fight back against this and fundamentally sort of dispute that assertion, right? And say, no, we are asserting our right to say, you are not speaking for real America. Real America is multiracial pluralism and egalitarian ideas of all people are created equal, right? And I think when I say there was a reluctance to do that, like, look, there's all this, like the way the mainstream media covers Trump, it is so grounded in this idea that he deserves to be heard and deference because he's speaking for like these real Americans and the forgotten American, and he's kind of embodying the sense of the soul of the real American. That stuff is in there, right? And on the Democratic side, and this has been sort of my biggest frustration with parts of Democratic leadership for quite some time, is there's too much. I don't know if people remember this, but like Dianne Feinstein hugged Lindsey Graham at the end of the Senate hearings for the Amy Coney Barrett nomination in 2020, and I thought, no, you don't hug him. That's terrible. Like the guy is, like, or for instance, like when Joe Biden sort of constantly emphasized his personal friendship with Mitch McConnell, which to me is not right because Mitch McConnell is one of the key enablers of Trumpism. He's one of the sort of most important gravediggers of American democracy. And regardless of your personal feelings, like that's you need to defeat that guy, right? And not tell the American public what a good guy that is. And so there's been all of this stuff, and I think to me it's been really refreshing over the past few weeks, this new stance to say, nah, we're not buying it anymore. Actually, we are the normal ones, and normal not in a kind of conformist sense, not in a we are imposing conformity on people, right? But in a we demand that the new normal in America is multiracial pluralism and people get to be their own selves and live their own identities. And you guys are the weird ones with your insistence on white Christian patriarchal conformity. I think that's really a new kind of this sort of more aggressive assertion of, no, you don't get to say who's the default American anymore. And I don't know if people saw this last week at a Democratic campaign event in Wisconsin. The band Bon Iver played Battle Cry of Freedom, this sort of abolitionist anthem written in 1862, one of the most popular songs from the Civil War era, which is really, if people know it, it's a really sort of, I mean, that's really sort of a declaration of we are fighting for this, right? It says like, you know, we're gonna be shouting the battle cry of freedom, down with the traitors, up with the stars, the Union forever. We are fighting for real America. That's the thing, right? And they played it at this Democratic campaign event, and I thought, this is perfect. This perfectly encapsulates this new kind of, it's a kind of a patriotism that says, no, you guys with your reactionary white Christian patriarchal stuff, you don't get to define American patriotism anymore. You don't get to define what the red, white, and blue is all about. We're going to do that now, right? And I thought that was perfect. I thought it was an amazing moment. So anyway, I have to tell you that I'm trying to be sort of level-headed about all of this stuff. It's going to be a long time until the election. I still think it's best to think about the election as it's a 50-50 call. It shouldn't be that, but it is that. It's extremely close, right? But I'm feeling significantly better about the prospects of democracy in America now than I felt a month ago.
Yes. I just want to remind everybody, I put the link out to the Project 2025 document. And I would advise you definitely to take Thomas's advice and read the first 15 pages. It's not on their website. I didn't put the link. I downloaded it, so you never have to go there. So just get the document and and take a look at it. Anne, did you want to ask something from the chat?
Yeah, we're overseas US citizens were living in a different kind of a world. My daughters don't live in Alabama or Texas. We live in stable democracies. We have healthcare. And so sometimes we feel insulated from this craziness and feel like, oh, well, America, it won't affect us. So can you paint a picture for us about how these policies in Project 2025 could really have a direct impact on the lives of Americans in Europe, where I live, and everywhere?
Well, I really don't know specifically about how that would affect Americans abroad, because I'm actually not familiar with, I mean, I'm not even American, right? I'm not familiar with your specific legal status and all that kind of stuff. What I want to say is that even if, like, forget all the ideological stuff for a second, what they want to do here to American government in a very sort of direct, immediate sense would just make government so much worse, right? Just worse, not even less. I'm not even talking about less democratic and all that. I'm talking about just worse, because again, think about what happens if you replace all these experts, people whose job it is to be an expert on, I don't know, whatever, climate science or whatever it may be, right? And you fire them all and you replace them with people whose sole qualification for this job is that they are right-wing loyalists, ideological loyalists. It's the kind of thing that makes government significantly worse, right? So at the very least, just American government would just turn into a vastly inferior product, right? That can't be great. Also, by the way, like this stuff, I mean, unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, for the rest of the world, I guess, America is far too big and far too powerful for any of that to not affect anyone across the globe. Like, for instance, these Project 2025 people, I mean, they talk about basically open economic warfare with China. They explicitly say in that policy document that they don't just want to, like, reconfigure economic relations with China. They want to end economic relations with China. Think about what that means. The two most powerful economies in the world, and one of them says we're going to end economic relations. It's insane. It's absolutely nuts, right? I mean, who knows what that means in practice? And it's obviously it's not that easy to just overnight end those kinds of economic connections. But that's how these people see the world, right? They say China is not, it's not just an opponent, it's our enemy, and we're not trading with our enemy anymore, right? So think about what that would do to the world economy, right? So even if someone isn't, I mean, I know everyone here is, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be here. But let's imagine someone who's like maybe not a big fan of the Democratic Party and maybe even doesn't care about all this democracy stuff because they think, oh, whatever, culture wars, blah, blah, blah. These people exist, right? But it's like, okay, do you maybe care about American government actually functioning and like the world economy not going to hell? Like that seems like important, right? I was at the last week, no, the week before, 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk at the German Foreign Office in Berlin, and they constantly talk about, oh, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for us? And I told them the same thing I'm telling you now. Look, even if you don't care about the democracy stuff, it means trouble is what that means, right? Because these people, I want to be clear about this. These people are not pretending. Like Kevin Roberts is not pretending to be like a far right ideologue. Like this guy he really means what he says. I really want to sort of, I really need people to take these people seriously when they say what they say, right? They mean it. Kevin Roberts is not some moderate imposter who just pretends to be hardcore to blend in with the MAGA crowd, right? The guy is, before ascending to the leadership of Heritage, he was the CEO at, I think it's called Texas Public Policy Foundation, a right-wing think tank in Austin, focusing on, amongst other things, fighting for the privatization of education, of course, and making the, quote, moral case for fossil fuels, right? So by rejecting the scientific consensus on climate change, like this is where these people come from. He comes out of the world of reactionary Catholicism. He's a true believer in the reactionary political project. When Giorgia Meloni in Italy got to power, the neo-fascists in Italy got to power in September 2022, Roberts, was the most enthusiastic voice in America. His immediate reaction was, he took to Twitter and he said, for him, Maloney was a role model. This is a direct quote. "This can be a trend. Conservatives everywhere need to define the choice as what it is: us versus them, everyday people versus globalist elites who've shown they hate us." So he's like, yes, neo-fascism. That's it. We want to do it. It's, again, these people mean what they say. They're true believers. And there's just no reason to, like, again, you don't want to believe me. That's totally fine. I get that. Like, why believe, like, the crazy lefty professor had some things to say. I sincerely mean this. Like, just read the foreword that Kevin Roberts wrote, and then you don't have to believe me. You can just believe him.
Yeah, that's yes, please believe this man. Please believe that I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that we've had, I would say, in my whole life, is that, because I think that the Republicans have always been like this, but it's been hidden or in the background. And now it's just coming more forward because they're getting rid of the more slick, people that can say other words and not say, wow, I really hate people of color and I'm going to deport all of them, and that it was always there. And all my life I've been trying to tell people, like, yeah, this person's a racist, that's a sexist, whatever. And people are like, well, we don't know what's in their heart. And I think that's a real problem. There's been a couple of questions in the actually more than a couple in the Q&A where people are asking, does the mandate specifically discuss the natural order with white Christian men at the top, or some flavor of that? Yes.
So yeah, I mean, again, so this is the mandate for leadership, this 920-page document. It has many different offers, right? Every chapter has a different offer. So every chapter discusses one department or one agency or one federal commission. So, and every chapter has a different offer. So you get a lot of different voices in there. But for instance, in the Department of Health and Human Services, they define marriage clearly by saying, oh, marriage as it is defined in the Bible, right? That sort of thing. So they're not like they're not like pretending that this is anything but a kind of an understanding of societal order that is based in their particularly sort of reactionary reading of Christianity. But I mean, again, I also want to say this is not sort of the most it's not the most overtly Christian nationalist document in the sense that they don't use the term Christian nationalism a lot, but the people behind it, they do all the time, right? So for instance, there's this guy who's a really interesting and important figure on the right. His name is Russell Vaught. He's a Trump alumni. He was in Trump's cabinet. He was the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And then after 2020, he founded the Center for Renewing America. And they are aggressively, openly, explicitly. He says, like, what's wrong with Christian nationalism? Of course, I'm a Christian nationalist, like 100%, right? This should be a white Christian nation. And this guy is very close with Trump. He was named the policy director for the Republican 2024 platform in May. That platform has just been published, right? The Republican platform is out. So he was the key author behind this. And he's also according to reports, the favorite to become Trump's chief of staff if they were to run to the White House. And he's also a contributor to Project 2025. He wrote a chapter in the policy agenda. And also he is supposedly, again, it's not out yet, but supposedly plays a key role in drafting this so-called playbook, the roadmap for the first 180 days, with all the immediate emergency measures. So this guy who is like a 100% like openly, I'm a Christian nationalist. I see my role as sort of imposing this of Christian nationalist vision on the entire country. He plays an absolutely key part in the Trump campaign, in Project 2025. He would be a key figure in a Trump administration. So yeah, this is sort of the type of ideology that is rising here and is sort of would get back to power.
Wow. We haven't talked about the environment or regulations. and there's a lot of questions in the chat about that, in the Q&A. What can you tell us about what they think about the environment?
Right. So first of all, if you know anything about the right-wing crusade against the modern state, it will not surprise you that Project 2025 plans for the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, to be sort of mostly dismantled, right? So this is a good example for the dismantling part of this project. Again, it's really important to it's not just about dismantling. They want to dismantle certain parts of government. Every part that could be used as a tool to make a fairer, more egalitarian society and solve actual collective action problems, that needs to be dismantled. But every part that can be used as a tool to impose their reactionary vision on the country, that's not going to be dismantled. That's going to be mobilized and weaponized. But the EPA is more on the dismantling side, right? So they want, as they put it, a quote, conservative EPA, as opposed to what they describe as, again, this is a direct quote, an agency that has long been amenable to being co-opted by the left or for its political ends, right? So that's how they describe this. This is very much in line with the conservative legal movement in general. They sort of their general deregulation agenda, and with sort of business interests of the Republican donor class. The EPA is symbolically significant to the right because it, and this is another quote, it has been a breeding ground for expansion of the federal government's influence and control across the economy, right? And they talk about the Biden administration's assault on the energy sector and forcing the economy to build out and rely on unreliable renewables, and that sort of thing, right? Job killing regulations, that sort of thing, right? So climate change is obviously the elephant in the room here. To the extent it is acknowledged at all in Project 2025, it is presented as just another boogeyman from the left, right? A boogeyman the left uses to scare people into compliance with their anti-American agenda. Again, this is a quote from the EPA section in the report. Although the US environmental story is very positive, there has been a return to fear-based rhetoric within the agency, especially as it pertains to the perceived threat of climate change, perceived threat. Mischaracterizing the state of our environment generally and the actual harms reasonably attributable to climate change specifically is a favored tool that the left uses to scare the American public into accepting their ineffective, liberty-crushing regulations, diminished private property rights, and exorbitant costs. Right. So again, this is very much in line with Kevin Roberts. He in his foreword talks about environmental extremism. And according to the right, that only serves one purpose. There's another quote. It's not a political cause, but a pseudo-religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue. That's Kevin Roberts in his foreword, right? So that's the way they talk about this. If you zoom out from the EPA section, Project 2025 does simply not acknowledge the climate crisis, right, as a big deal. And any measure to counteract and mitigate climate change are derided throughout the report as pure woke radicalism. There's a chapter on the executive office of the president where it says, quote, the Biden administration's climate fanaticism, right, and social engineering and non-defense. This is from the National Security Council chapter. It says, the National Security Council should stop paying attention to social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and that sort of thing, right? So it's all throughout the report. This is all like woke extremism, climate fanaticism, environmental extremism. It all has to go. It's out.
But climate is not, these are educated people. These are not ignorant people. I'm thinking of people like Elon Musk, who supports Trump and all of that, and some of these tech bros, all these Silicon Valley billionaires. These are not dumb, ignorant people. They ought to. Why are they denying the climate crisis? I mean, why are they on board with this?
This is ultimately a struggle over status and power, and that overrides everything else for these people, right? So this is not discussed as I think this would be the biggest mistake, to look at any of these policy fields as we are discussing distinct policy fields. We're not doing that, or they are not doing that. They see all of this as this just another battlefield in a much stronger struggle, right? And that much stronger struggle is this broader struggle against the quote unquote woke left extremist radicalism and that sort of thing. So I think this is generally, if you look at the sort of recent history of environmentalism or anti-environmentalism in the United States, this is what's happened since. I mean, remember, it was Richard Nixon who founded or it was during the Nixon administration that the environmental administrative state was founded and established. The EPA was established in the early 1970s. Nixon talked about, this has to be an environmental decade, the 1970s, and we have to sort of reclaim our nature and something. So there was a moment still in the late 60s, early 70s, where the fault lines of the broader struggle between left and right had not yet come to completely overwhelm this particular field. But that changed over time. And by the early 90s, with the emergence of the sort of climate change denialism stuff, no one is talking about the actual like environmental policy issues anymore. This is not how they approach any policy field. They're just approaching it as yet another battlefield in which, well, the enemy is clearly defined. It's the quote unquote woke left, right? And whatever they say has to be opposed. Whatever they want to do has to be rejected. They have to be defeated. And so that logic, that broader logic, you might call it culture war logic or whatever, has completely come to overwhelm these policy fields. And I think you see this in Project 2025, where, yeah, I mean, this is a combination of the very traditional deregulation agenda of the conservative legal movement and conservatives of the Republican donor class, but on steroids, because it's and the steroids are the sort of radicalizing perception of the woke assault on America. So that's coming on top of all of that, right? And that's what you get here.
These people are kind of scary. There's a question in the Q&A that's really one that I think deserves consideration. Like, they're talking about deporting 50 million people.
Yes.
So that must also include American citizens.
Yes.
And where do they expect all these deported people to go, especially if they are U.S. citizens and have never lived anywhere else?
Yeah, I don't think they care much. I mean, you're absolutely right. That number, you don't get to that number by just deporting the quote unquote illegals, right? Or the undocumented immigrants. You do not get to that number. Right. So very clearly, and by the way, that number rises constantly. I think I just read Trump just said 18 million, but it's constantly rising, right? No, I think, look, the most realistic look at this is to say this is a purge, right? This is purging the nation from, those who supposedly don't belong here, because they do not reflect the image of what these people think America is supposed to look like, which is like me, right? White and male and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And where do they go? I mean, look, Stephen Miller, if you listen to Stephen Miller, who is sort of kind of in charge of, within the Trump campaign, kind of in charge of this immigration stuff, well, he will say, well, we're going to build just camps alongside the southern border. We're going to put them in camps, and then we're going to put them out. There's not much more policy thought behind this. Like, they're not. This is the thing, right? This is what I want to be. Why this immigration stuff is so revealing and so important. Project 2025, for instance, they're also hardcore restrictionists, right? They believe in hardcore deterrence by cruelty, like family separation. Awesome, right? So deterrence by cruelty. They want to make it easier to detain children under horrible conditions. They don't want people to show up at the border as asylum seekers, right? For instance, Project 2025 also says going to end or dramatically curtail any form of legal immigration. Like, they want to curtail the visa programs. They want to gut asylum. And they want to potentially rescind the legal status of hundreds of thousands of people who are in the United States but lack permanent status, right? And again, they also talk about creating this standalone border and immigration agency with Project 2025 says, at least 100,000 employees or whatever. And then the Trump campaign, and here's where you see how compatible these proposals are, right? So again, Trump campaign has its own immigration proposals, but they're totally compatible with this Project 2025 vision, right? Because Trump himself, again, he puts out these aggressive statements all the time, and now it's also codified in the Republican official Republican platform. And like again, he says, no, we're going to go much further than that, actually, right? We're going to go and you know, round up 15 million people. And again, that's not a number that's in Project 2025, but it's totally in keeping with the general vision of like purging the nation from the people who don't belong here, right? And again, it would necessitate a massive deportation force. And again, what they share is this vision of ending immigration of non-white people based on this underlying vision of restoring white Christian dominance. And the only way to realize what Trump and Miller want is to suspend all the rules and regulations intended to protect the humanity and human rights of migrants, right? That's like that's why they want to get rid of all the pesky lawyers who during Trump's first presidency had qualms about what the regime was trying to do. Like if you still think about this problem, like the way you asked, Angela, like the question was, well, how are they going to make this work? They can't just put these people like somewhere where they've never lived. I'm like, well, they don't think about it that way. They don't think about it as in, oh, we need to respect these people's rights or dignity or humanity. They don't think about it that way, right? And so yeah, that's how you get to 15 million people and this kind of mass deportation. And by the way, again, like I mean, people will remember this during the Republican convention, like all the people in the stands holding up these signs, mass deportation now. What a moment in American politics where one of the major parties is that's where they are, right? Like with all these Republican delegates holding up signs which says mass deportation now. And I just don't see any reason to not believe them when they say, I mean, this is 100% Trump's number one priority, right? 100%. I just don't see any reason to believe they don't mean it. Stephen Miller clearly means it when he says that.
It doesn't even make economic sense. It would be a disaster economically. And
yeah.
They never think of that, apparently.
No, actually, it wouldn't necessarily, because what this sounds like, and I don't want to be like a doomsayer or something, but in Nazi Germany, when they moved all the people to the ghettos, other people took over their houses and their businesses and all sorts of things. So it'll give a lot of people a big come up at the expense of others, for sure.
I mean, but at the risk of, I don't want to sound like relativizing in any way what the Nazis did, but there were 600,000 German Jews living in Germany in 1933. We're talking about 15 million people here, right? And we're not talking about wealthy people. They're not taking, like, what the Nazis did was they deported these, like a wealthy Jewish family in Hamburg, and then some real German got like a nice massive house in a nice neighborhood in Hamburg. We're talking about the 15 million people they want to round up here. They don't live in like mansions somewhere, right? I mean, most of them don't, right? This is not like, again, the overriding priority for them is not like economic realism, right? The overriding priority is to say, this once great nation, America, is under threat and in decline because of the enemy within and the enemy without, and they're in cahoots. By the way, this is one of the things in the Project 2025 document that they constantly say, like, oh, the woke left at home, they're in cahoots with communist China. Like, complete nonsense, right? But they constantly say this. So they really believe like the way to restore former national glory of this once great nation, like make America great again, right, is to purge the nation from the enemy within. And the enemy within is defined in racial terms and, of course, in cultural terms. And that's the priority here. That's the project, right? And so, yeah, don't talk to Stephen Miller about like what this means for the American agriculture or whatever. He's like, people need to go.
Wow. Does the blueprint, the 2025, envision deporting all minority citizens of color, or like African Americans, Asian Americans, or is it just people who they consider migrants?
So, I mean, like I said, in the Project 2025 policy document, they don't talk about 15 million people, right? They don't give a specific number, and so
okay.
they're not doing that. And then on the Trump side, so the Trump campaign they're the ones talking about like putting out these numbers. But they are not doing this kind of like, we're writing everything down in great detail, right? I mean, I don't know, people probably have seen what the official Republican platform looks like. It's just a bunch of talking, like Trumpist talking points. They're not spelling anything out. It's literally just talking points. And I think the number 2 is like, uh, border, save the border or something. Like that's it. That's of the amount of like detail you get. And so we have to just fill in the blanks and like think about, wait, okay, 15 million people. What would that even mean in practice? Like how many people would you need as a deportation force to like put this into practice? But they're not spelling this out, right?
Wow. Wow. I discovered the other day that Kevin Roberts makes over 675,000 a year. Where are they getting all this money to pay people these massive salaries, all this massive recruiting and training and all the other stuff that they're doing? Is there a clear source, or is this dark money?
I mean, much of it is not dark, as in we know like some of the big Republican donors like Koch Foundation or whatever, right? We know where some of that money is coming from. It's just one of the ways in which the political conflict has been very sort of asymmetric is that this right-wing think tank world is just so well funded, and they really take care of their own, right? There's like the money that is in that world is just not, there's nothing comparable equivalent on the quote unquote left. Yeah, and that's so, I mean, that's not even, to me, that number is not very high. I mean, I like, it is high, of course, but like that's just the money he gets from Heritage, right? That's his official salary. If I would assume there's other sources, like he's giving talks in front of the Republican donor class somewhere, and then he gets a really nice honorarium for that, I guess. No, but yeah, that's the thing, right? There is, and by the way, you see this also with the way, like right now, we've seen this really worrying but not very surprising. So if the whole tech, Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur world has come around to supporting Trump, more openly supporting Trump, not just Musk and like Peter Thiel, who is, I mean, Peter Thiel is one of sort of the leading thinkers on the fascist right? I mean, Peter Thiel, like this very one of the most important sort of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley of the past few decades. He in 2009 gave this really important speech where he said, look, democracy and freedom are incompatible. And so democracy has to go, because he defines freedom as his freedom to do as he pleases and be unburdened by like not just regulations, but also like civil rights stuff and that sort of thing, right? He like, so that's they're one, and now JD Vance, of course, is like he's Peter Thiel's protege, right? JD Vance's most important influence and his entry into that whole far-right intellectual scene is Peter Thiel. So we're not talking about sort of esoteric, who cares about these? Peter Thiel is extremely influential, and he's now basically on the ticket, right, for the Republican Party. And so these people are coming around to Trump. And why are they coming around to Trump? Because that's, look, the basic Republican or the right-wing worldview that postulates that the world works best if it's run by wealthy white men, that has a certain appeal to wealthy white men, right? even if they may think of themselves as not reactionaries or not Republicans or whatever. So it really doesn't matter what Elon Musk thinks of himself or used to think of himself or how he describes himself. Ultimately, he looks at the world and he realizes, wait a minute, like these people on the quote unquote left, they think there should be like limits to my power and my status. Like, that's not right. I should be able to do whatever I want to do, whatever I please, right? And so, I mean, look, it's not, I don't think it's rocket science to explain why these people ultimately, but that's where that money is coming from. Like Peter Thiel, that's where that money is coming from, right? There's a lot of that stuff on the right.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think we've probably taken enough of your time for today. Still a lot of questions. Anne, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm putting some pieces together here and thinking, oh my goodness, we've been thinking about this all wrong, line by line in this 900-page document. But Thomas, you've given us the overview of the reason for the darn thing, the reason for the 900 pages. And I think some of us have missed that in looking at this little policy and that little policy. So I thank you for giving us the real purpose of it, the bottom line on it, which I have never heard so clearly articulated as I have today by you.
Can I, if we have just 2 minutes, I want to, if I can, I think I want to end on a slightly more positive maybe note, because, you know, usually when that's unfortunately, if your work focuses on sort of the anti-democratic right, that's usually what you get from me, is usually a lot of this kind of stuff, right? But I do want to really emphasize something. I think I kind of touched on this earlier. Like, this is sort of my glass half full kind of interpretation of where we are, right? It's really important to remember that this radicalization of the right, the radicalization of the Republican Party, it's not coming from a place of strength. It's coming from this place of weakness, right? They're radicalizing because they feel their backs against the wall. They're feeling under siege. And here's the thing, they are reacting to something real. In many ways, this country has never been closer to finally fulfilling that promise, which it has never kept, right? But which has always been part of the American tradition, which is, again, that promise of all people are created equal. That means a society in which an individual's status would not be defined by race or gender orientation or religion or wealth, right? So obviously, again, America has never been that, right? But in many ways, it's also never been closer to that than it is today. Like, at what point in history would you point to and say, not you, but anyone, point to and say, oh, this is where we were closer to a functioning multiracial egalitarian democracy? There is none. It is today, right? And that is precisely why these people are so aggressively not on, who are so aggressively not on board with that vision, who think that this is not just America changing, but actually, quote unquote, real America being destroyed. That's why they are radicalizing. That's why they're giving themselves permission to radicalize, because they think they're losing. And again, my sort of glass half full reading of that situation is that this is a moment of world historic opportunity, because this type of multiracial, pluralistic, egalitarian democracy has actually never existed anywhere in the world. You see a lot of stable democracies. Think Sweden, right? A lot of you live in Europe. Think Sweden. Some of you may even be in Sweden. That's a stable democracy. But if you look at the Swedish society, look, it's not super multiracial. It's not super pluralistic. If you compare it to American society, right? It's not super pluralistic religiously, but a truly pluralistic, hard word to say once you've said it 50 times, a truly pluralistic society, racially, ethnically, religiously, like the American society today, if that can prove to the world that this can actually work, you can make egalitarian democracy work under such conditions, such circumstances, that will be of tremendous, like truly world historic importance, right? And again, no one understands this better than the people on the right. They are terrified by this. That is why they're radicalizing, because for them, it's like, I don't know, the destruction of Western civilization or whatever. So in a sense, right, let's not buy into any kind of bravado from the right. Oh, we're so strong. No, they're weak and they're losing. That's why they're radicalizing. And that also makes them dangerous, right? I want to be clear, right? Because they truly believe they are the noble defenders of real America, there is no line that they don't feel justified in crossing. So they will cross those lines, right? Any measure, regardless of how extreme, is justified because they believe they are defending real America. So I'm not saying, don't worry, it's going to be fine. It might not be fine. I'm not super optimistic. What I'm saying is, right, this is a world historic chance. We're at sort of like kind of an inflection point, as kind of a crossroads, right? But this struggle, like this tension that defines America right now between the majority of the society is going one way towards a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. And then so this disproportionate amount of power lies with people who are not on board with that. That tension will have to be resolved. It can be resolved one way or the other. It could be resolved in the direction of a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. That has to be the hope, right? It could also be resolved in the direction of an increasingly authoritarian minority rule. those are the options on the table right now, right? And that's, I think, how you need to think about sort of the next 20, 30 years in American history. This tension will be resolved. It will resolve in one way or the other. And we have to sort of do whatever we can do to resolve it towards multiracial pluralistic democracy.
Yes. And
That's
with that,
actually encouraging. That makes me feel a little bit better.
Right?
They just
Yes.
mind their own damn business, as Mr. Waltz says.
Right, right.
yeah. And seriously, we all know what to do. We've got to vote. We've got to get our friends and family to vote. I put a link in the chat, and I'm also going to send this out to everybody that RSVP'd, a link on how to help get out the vote, things that you can do alone or with others, and also donate, because we have an ongoing Get Out the Vote campaign where we buy digital advertising in different platforms and newspapers around the world. So that is also very important, that people donate to us and help us out. And so with that, I thank everybody who hung out through the whole thing. In the beginning, I wasn't sure how long this was going to be, but I thought, no, it couldn't be almost 2 hours, but I think we could probably talk about another 2 hours on this subject. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you so much, Thomas, for coming with us. And I'm also going to share, I've shared your links for your Substack, but I'm also going to put it in the email that I send everybody after this too, so they have them. Thank you, Anne, so much for joining us. And yeah, I hope everybody learned something, and hope they can take away that we're winning and we're making them nervous. So let's keep winning. Let's keep winning. Let's keep voting, and let's hold the line for our democracy, for our families, for our lives, for our existence, just our normal existence. Because the days of white men writing manifestos and then getting us all having to live them out is over, with a capital O. So thanks everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much, Thomas.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Okay.